spend a moment, see if there are any announcements. I see we have Alyssa Erickson from Continuing Education. We'll give her a moment in a second for an announcement, but are there other announcements from IPSO or anything else that we'd like to do? The answer to that is no.
Yes, no, sorry. We
Go
have
ahead.
the International Food Night tomorrow night, 5:30 to 7:30 in the West Ballroom.
Okay.
For family as well.
That is tomorrow, you said, starting at 5:30?
Yes.
Okay. Many people there. Alyssa, good afternoon.
Hello. Sorry, I'm tuning in on my way to the McKay, but I figured it'd be better for me to be on time than not. So yes, thanks for giving me a chance to talk about some of the opportunities that we have at continuing education right now. The purpose is just to gauge interest in internship and job opportunities that we have. So a little bit of context is that I used to work as a student employee at continuing education to help with their online courses. That's really what got me interested in instructional design and the IP&T program. And then I graduated about 5 years ago with my master's degree. And since then, I've been working as an instructional designer. And I'm a little out of breath because I was speed walking, so I apologize for that. So now I just recently started a new position as their production process manager. And one thing that we're really working to accomplish in the next 1.5 to 2 years is producing 60 new high school courses. We've already done 60 in our first phases of the project, and we have another 60 to go. And we're needing some more support. And so we thought of you, the amazing IP&T students, as being a wonderful resource for that. And with that, I have a survey, and I have it printed on a QR code here. So maybe we'll try this, and I have a bit.ly short URL that you can use as well. And it's going to pull up a survey that kind of describes some of these opportunities that we have coming up. And I would love for each of you to fill it out just with, what you would be interested in if you were to work with us in the future, or if you were to do an internship with us in the future. So,
and Alyssa, you can't, it looks like a lot of people are in the McKay building. So if you make it over there still, you can share that in person as well. You're welcome to share it. Sure, you're welcome to put the bit.ly in. You're welcome to hold that QR code up for a second if you want, but also there's a lot of people I see in the McKay building.
Okay, maybe I'll come over to answer questions after. But for
Great.
Those who are online and want to scan it now, this is the QR code. And the bit.ly address that we have is the bit.ly and then /C job openings, or job interest is what's on there. Okay. So if somebody could try scanning it and see if it works, that would be great. And what you're going to see on here are just a few different options. I'll summarize them real quick and then I'll be done. So one thing that we're looking at is, are people more interested in internships versus jobs? Ideally, we would have someone for more than a semester, but we're definitely open to, semester-based projects that people might want to work on. And those projects might include anything from, there's standards alignment that needs to be done on some of our high school courses specifically. There are some ELL writing opportunities, and then just course development is one of them. Basically taking a course that was in our old LMS, helping move it to the new one with more interactivity. And then also, if students do work with us for a couple semesters and then they graduate, we also contract with them after graduation sometimes to have them continue working on projects with us. So you'll see that as a part of the survey as well. And yes, I'll head your direction. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. Students, this is a great opportunity working with Continuing Education. They're a great partner with us, and if there's any interest there, I think Alyssa would just really appreciate talking to you for a few minutes when she makes it. We're going to turn the time now over to our speaker for today, Dr. TJ Kopcha from the University of Georgia. We are sad that he can't be with us in person, but we understand some health concerns and things like that from home, but we're still really glad that we have an opportunity to hear from you today. So without any other delay, if you'll just join me in welcoming Dr. Kopcha to our seminar today, and we'll turn the rest of the time over to you.
I appreciate it. I was just texting with Heather there saying, you guys are a packed house. I'm not sure what was promised about this talk, so hopefully I live up to whatever expectations there were. I am here virtually. Thank you for being understanding with my last minute change to the trip about my back and everything. But I'm here to talk about embodied cognition, which is something that I have been studying and using to frame my research now for, gosh, 7 or 8 years. And it may be something you've never heard of. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, I can at least pique your interest and improve your awareness of what it is and what it means for our field. So I have a Latin phrase on the screen. I'm hoping that we're in sync here. Cogito ergo sum. Anybody know what that means? You can put it in the chat or just say it out loud if you know. Yeah, that's exactly right. And we know it even more colloquially as I think, therefore I am, but Isaac has got it right. Oh, am I not sharing my screen? Sorry. Thank you, whoever said that. I was sharing my screen and then it stopped. So yeah, it is Rene Descartes. I think, therefore I am, or I think, therefore I exist. And I wanted to start with this phrase. If you read anything about embodied cognition, it really pushes back against the dualism that gets introduced between your brain and your body that really is rooted in this one simple phrase by Descartes. So to get our heads in the right space for embodied cognition, I'm going to reframe that phrase and say, embodied cognition is really about I am, therefore I think. And that might be hard to wrap your head around because our field really is rooted in the other way around. Most of our theories of learning are rooted in the idea that the brain and the body are relatively separate and the body serves one purpose, stimuli. And then the brain takes over from there. And so embodied cognition really does flip that. Now, if you're confused by that, I'm going to start with a pretty concrete example. And if I was there in person, it might be easier to facilitate this, but we're going to give it a shot. I want you to think the last time that you smelled or tasted cinnamon. I want you to remember not only where you were, but what you were doing, what the cinnamon was in, maybe even what it tasted like. And because we're virtual, we can't turn to the person next to us and share, but maybe we can put some things in the chat that you remember about the last time you smelled or tasted cinnamon. There's a cinnamon challenge. I just got one text about choking from a cinnamon challenge. There is a cinnamon challenge. Is it like a TikTok thing? Am I still going here? Sorry. Yeah, good. Okay. Christmas. Good. Fresh apple cider that your wife made just yesterday. Cinnamon. They're handing out Mexican hot chocolate. The cinnamon roll in the Orlando airport at AECT. Good. Yep. Reminds me of fall. Look at this. Look at all of this cinnamon. There was a little delay in the chat. It's all coming up now like a waterfall. So, oh, snickerdoodles. If I say it wrong, I'm sorry. Janet, can you tell us a little bit more about snickerdoodles? What about them?
Okay,
Did you make them? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm nervous to open. Okay, we're just in together, and so I'm hoping that there's not that weird echo thing. Yeah, I made snickerdoodles, and do you just want me to describe?
Go for it.
Okay, that's kind of hard because it's kind of like describe salt. Well, it's salty, it's cinnamony. So,
But
I
you were
don't know.
making them at
Anyone else
home.
wanna- What?
You were making them.
Yeah, I made them.
You could smell it when you put it in.
Yes, I could smell it, and then I could taste it afterwards.
Can you even remember what it looked like as you stirred it into the batter?
Uh-huh. You see
You want-
the little specks.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. All of this is going somewhere, so bear with me on this, okay? My example of cinnamon, I was making tea that the weather had just turned, which for us here in Georgia means it went from like 88 to 75. So bear that in mind. But I was cold. I was sitting here in this room. I was cold and I wanted to warm up a little bit. And I'm like, I need some tea. I need to be not caffeinated. I went over and rummaged. I found autumn tea from Trader Joe's. Delicious. Could smell the cinnamon immediately. I made my tea. I enjoyed it, right? We all have the, like, cinnamon is such a strong smell that we all have these memories of it that could either be from yesterday for some people or for long ago for others, or even a combination of both of them. So I wanted to use the cinnamon tea to talk about embodied cognition in contrast with what we more typically know of as cognition, which is the information processing model of cognition. So if you think about cinnamon tea and how you got that memory of cinnamon tea in your brain from an information processing model, you first had to have sensory input. And again, cinnamon is very strong. So I like using that as an example. If you didn't attend to it, though, that information would have gotten lost. Once you attend to it, there's still more that has to happen in the brain for it to become a memory, right? You have to rehearse it. And you have to rehearse it in a way that it goes from sensory information to symbolic amodal representations of knowledge. That's the way this theory goes. So you take it away from your senses, you take it away from the input that it was, and you store it differently in the brain. That can get encoded and then later retrieved and pulled back out, and you can manipulate that in your memory. And so that's the theory behind you remembering your cinnamon tea. And so what I want to do is take a moment and be a little bit critical of what that might look like. And I want to point out two really important, like, key ideas behind information processing. One is that you have to rehearse it because unrehearsed information will be lost. And two, you have to encode it, right? And you do it by making it symbols that you store in your brain. And if you don't use those symbols, over time, they'll be lost, according to the theory. So now let's look at how cinnamon tea memories hold up to that. Did you decide to attend to cinnamon when you made snickerdoodles? No, it might have caught your attention. I didn't decide like, oh, I'm going to really pay attention to Trader Joe's autumnal harvest tea because it's really important. I can still remember and visualize like the box that it was in, right? But I didn't do that on purpose. I only did it once. How many times did you rehearse your cinnamon tea memory? Probably once. Was it encoded amodally, or are you remembering all of the things that went with it? The vision, the smell, the things around you, the sensations that you felt, right? Mine has all of that. I felt warm. I knew I was going to get warm. I was anticipating getting warm, right? And my memory was 6 weeks ago. Some of you were like, it reminds me of fall, like probably fall a long time ago, right? So for a lot of us, information processing didn't do very well. That's not how the cinnamon tea memory got formed in your brain. So how did it get formed? If it's not information processing, and that's the primary mechanism that we have in our field for thinking about cognition, then what? Hang on, because I have the answer. So embodied cognition does a really good job of explaining how our memory works this way. Embodied cognition at its core is about an intimate relationship between not just your brain, but your brain and your body and your environment, the world that's around you, right? They're not separate anymore. There's no more I think, therefore I am. It's I am, therefore I think. It assumes that we are goal-driven people and that in order to achieve those goals, we have to come up with possibilities for action in the world. And then we act on those possibilities for action, but it's ongoing, right? New things in our environment give us new possibilities for action and we respond to that. And it's this back and forth, constant, ongoing dynamic relationship. I'm going to get philosophical for just one slide. Any fans of Merleau-Ponty out there? Yes. Who wouldn't be a fan of Merleau-Ponty? The things he writes are beautiful and they're really meaningful and deep. And this is one of them. He is really known as a person who made a shift in phenomenology towards the idea of embodiment and bringing embodied perspectives to phenomenology. In his phenomenology of perception, he talks about how we come across the idea that rather than a mind and a body, meaning that they're separate, man is a mind with a body, a being who can only get to the truth of things because its body is, as it were, embedded in those things, right? And I wanna emphasize that last part. We are beings who can only get to the truth of things because our bodies are embedded in the things that we're trying to get to the truth of. Our bodies exist in the world and we cannot escape that. And our brain is there kind of along for the ride to help us make sense of it and do good things in the world. And this is where it is, I am, therefore I think, rather than I think, therefore I am. So James Gibson is probably most well known for pushing back against information processing ideas about how the brain works. He wrote The Ecological Approach to Visual Perception. Does anybody recognize that name, Gibson? Maybe his wife, E.J. Gibson, very famously did a series of experiments with young babies on perception, created a cliff that they would walk. And there was a piece of glass so that they didn't actually fall off the cliff, but she wanted to see how close babies would get to that cliff before they fell off. So you've got two people now who are working in this idea of visual perception, looking at the way the brain works and the way we cognate. And so James Gibson is, her husband. He worked with fighter pilots in World War II, right? Very similar to Gagne working in the military in World War II. There was a lot of money going into the psychology of cognition and the way we think and getting people to do better around that time. In his work with fighter pilots, what he noticed was that perception and action were directly linked. So the theory with information processing is that when you take in some kind of stimuli with your eyeballs, it's playing like a movie on the back of your retina. And that movie then has to get encoded in your brain in order to become something that you can use. Gibson called it the little man with the movie projector in your brain. And he said, that is not at all how it works. There is no little man with a projector in your brain, like taking that movie image and then converting it into something else. What you're seeing and what you're doing are directly connected. Your brain and your body are directly connected. And he was referring to the way that pilots would very easily use visual clues in their field of vision in order to figure out how to like land a jet, tell it where to go, how to get it to take off, right? It was all visual clues that they were using, and sometimes like in a millisecond making decisions about that. So his theory, which is called ecological psychology, puts forward this idea that cognition is really a complex dynamic system where brain, body, and environment are all working together in order to do something in the world. So, let me see here. I picked this quote not only because I am like fanatical about hyphens in my students' writing, but because I want you to look at how many hyphens are in this quote. That's a lot of hyphen. Has anybody ever seen a word that's been hyphenated? Like, because remember, hyphens make it all one word. And if you think about it that way, then what Gibson was really trying to say here was that you don't just see the environment with your eyes. It's your eyes and the head on the body resting on the ground. It's all of it together that creates for us what we see in the world. And those things are inseparable. And that's really where embodied cognition starts to pull apart from other forms of cognition. It's the inseparability of brain and body and environment and the way it pulls all those together. The key here, and this is where the focus starts to shift, which in LDT it's a new idea for a lot of people. It's the interaction between the body and the environment that becomes central, not only to what we do. That's a really good point. Yeah, a lot of our systems are based on that Cartesian duality is what they call it, right? Like that there's a separation between brain and body. This is why I loved embodied cognition when I encountered it, because it explains more of the things that I mess up in my life and then fix than any other form of cognition ever does, right? I'll throw it out there. I have ADD. I do a lot of things wrong every day. And I fix a lot of things every day because I do those things wrong. And I learn from it. And embodied cognition captures that relationship so much better than information processing ever did for me. So I talked a lot. I gave you some theory. I gave you an example from World War II. But I want you to think for a minute now, just to really solidify this idea that the relationship between the body and the environment is what's central. I want you to think about how you catch a ball. Like really think about it. There, I'm throwing a ball at you. Now you're catching. What are the things that you're thinking about and noticing, right? So from an information processing perspective, the first thing that's happening is sensory. We see the ball, right? And we have to attend to the ball. Then we have to dig through the filing cabinet in our brain to look for things that help us catch a ball, right? We have to hold our hands a certain way. We have to put our body in a certain place. Okay, that's great when the ball is 50 feet away, but then it gets closer and the wind moves a little. Information processing says, well, we repeat the process now. We take in visual information. We dig through the filing cabinet. We pull something out. Okay, well, now I have to estimate where it's landing. We dig through the filing cabinet and then we pull it up. That's a lot of work for catching a ball. Does it feel that way when you catch a ball? No, it doesn't sound fun. Nobody would want to catch a ball. Dogs would not want to catch a ball if that's what it took to catch a ball, right? So the going theory on how we catch a ball is very much embodied. The first thing we do is we check to see how rapidly the shape of that ball is expanding in our field of view. Why? What does expanding mean? What does it represent? It represents speed. Same thing when you're driving in a car. You're watching the brake lights in front of you. The quicker those brake lights expand in front of you, the less time you have to react. It's just a visual perception thing. So we're looking to see how quickly it expands because that tells us how much time we have in order to react to this thing. But that's not all we're doing. So now we're looking at it. And the theory is that we create a line of tangency between the ball and our eyeballs. And we try and maintain that line of tangency at all times. If the line of tangency starts to fall short, we move forward. If the tangency moves farther back, we move back. That's how we anticipate. It moves left, we move left, right? That kind of thing. So it's very much about this relationship between brain and body in reaction to ongoing changes in the environment. And we do it with some very simple visual perception tricks and other perception tricks so that it's fun to catch a ball. And we can do it over and over and over again and enjoy the experience without having this cognitive demand of constantly reaching into this filing cabinet to pull out encoded information and then reconstitute it in order to figure out how to catch a ball. And that brings us to grounded cognition. Grounded cognition does not encompass all of embodied cognition, but it is an embodied approach to cognition. And the key idea behind behind grounded cognition, and the ball is a great example of this, it rejects the idea of traditional views of cognition, that cognition is about computing on amodal symbolic information that's somehow been stored in the brain. Okay, well, if it's not that, then what is it? What it puts forward is that everything that we do in our brains is based in modal simulations, meaning our senses, the things that we use to experience the thing, our bodily states when we experience the thing, and sometimes the actions that thing was situated in. Now that's a lot of words, so I'm going to give you a very quick visual to put all this into perspective. The T. Think about how you remembered the tea. Or I remember the tea. Sorry, think about how you remembered cinnamon, but how I remember the tea. I can remember the visuals. I can remember what it felt like. It was warm. I was excited. I had emotional reaction. I was cold and wanted to get warm. It smelled great. Somebody remembered what the cinnamon looked like going into the batter, right? I asked you that. You're like, yeah, I remember that. Of course you do. It's modal. Those are the senses that were used to remember that. And Barcelou is the guy, he used to work at Emory. He's an emeritus professor now. His whole point was that when you take in sensory information, it lights up different patterns in your brain. That's the modal part of it. And it's not just one area of your brain. It can be multiple areas of your brain. In the future, if anything triggers one part of that pattern of memory, it can trigger the whole thing. It's why sometimes when you go out on a really cold day and the cold hits you in the face, you remember like when you were a kid in the snow. It's modal, it's bodily state, and it's situated action. These are the things that our brain does when we're cognating. We have to have actions in order to create the memory patterns, and then we can use those memory patterns in the future. In fact, the human brain is so interesting that we don't even have to have the thing there in order to recreate it, and he calls that a simulation. He talks about these simulations that we engage in our brains. When we think of a concept, what we're doing is we're simulating the ways that we have encountered that concept in the past. We can even do it to the point where we can simulate something new for that concept. And so Barcelou's idea here is that when we encounter something that we want to do in the world, we first think like, well, what could happen here? This is like in sports where they find that athletes who can visualize themselves making a three-point shot from the three-point line do better at making those shots than athletes who don't. We have to be able to envision what it is that we want to do or what will happen in the world. We anticipate the results. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? Sometimes we know, sometimes we don't know. We do our best to infer from our past knowledge what's going to happen. Then we take action. Taking action creates new information, which means we can visualize potentially new possible actions. And so it's an ongoing loop between us, the environment, and our brains, where we set goals, we figure out ways to achieve those goals, we try it, we do it again and again and again. Or we have ADD and we screw something up and we look at what we screwed up, we simulate a new possible action, we anticipate the results, and we try it again and again and again. And to me, that is what my existence has been like for my entire life. Like, it isn't about remembering things and storing them. It's about perceiving and acting and doing it over and over and over again. Sometimes those things stick, sometimes they don't. So what the heck does this have to do with LDT? Let's get to the good stuff, Kopcha. I'm going to tell you what it has to do with LDT. Gestures. I'm making gestures, but I was a math teacher, and I've always been fascinated at how we think mathematically through our bodies. Why do we do that? I'll tell you why. Because the number one doesn't exist. I want you to hear that. The number one does not exist. We can look at one of something, but the number one itself is abstract. You have to have the of something for it to make sense in our world. Otherwise, it just doesn't exist. And so what we do is, a lot of times we use our body to represent mathematical things that are abstract and don't exist. Euclidean geometry. Hands, yeah, exactly. Yeah, pairing any kind of movement with learning is actually a good way to engage that modal system. Euclidean geometry. You probably spent a whole year of high school learning it, and then maybe even did it again in college, right? Does a plane have thickness? No. Do 2D objects have thickness? No. Now tell me what in our world has no thickness? Nothing. Atoms have thickness. Everything has thickness. We exist in a three-dimensional world, and we spend years of our lives pretending that those qualities and characteristics don't exist so that we can mathematize. And that's fascinating to me that we do that. And so what we do is We use representations of the abstract thing that doesn't exist in place of that thing. So we look at a flat surface like it's a plane. Planes have no thickness and go on forever. These don't, but we don't have anything that looks like that in our world. So mathematically, the relationship between brain, body, and environment becomes really important because it's the only tool we have to access the mathematical things that don't exist, they're abstract, in our 3D world. And so that's where a lot of my research is focused from here. Oh boy. Oh boy. That's good though. I do like a good dad joke here and there. I almost did one with Descartes. Descartes is most famously known for that quote, but he's also known for not putting Descartes before Deshorse. But my kids told me not to tell that joke. So, but since the puns are coming, I had to pull one out. Anyways, I asked you to read a paper that we wrote where we looked at what kids were doing with their hands and their bodies while they were thinking about a robotics task. There was a lot going on here from an embodied perspective. They were offloading their cognition to a map that they hand drew, and they had to visualize computer code, which is abstract and doesn't exist, but they had to visualize it in the way the robot would embody it. And to do that, they used their own bodies to simulate those actions and to simulate what the robot could possibly do when it was at the 3x3 grid. And we found not only the gestures where they imitated the robot and did some mathematics were important, but they actually used a lot of proportional thinking as part of this. Now, you've read my article. You watched my webinar. That was just so I could get to the good stuff. This isn't the good stuff. Okay? The good stuff is this. What we found is that analyzing video data of kids for an hour was excruciatingly boring and tedious. Has anybody done video analysis like this? This moment by moment, pulling apart, what did somebody do? What did it mean? You read my article, we use social semiotics. You don't just look at the gesture. The gesture means something in relation to everything else, and you have to figure out what that is. You have to hear what they say. You have to look at what they do. Very tedious, right? Consider that there are 27 frames per second in video. A 5-minute clip can have over 1,000 potential frames to look at. Well, that is very true. So here's what we decided. And if my student was here, she'd laugh because she told me it wasn't possible. We were having coffee one day. I still remember, because remember, modal states and bodily states all are important here. We were having coffee at a coffee shop, and I said to her, why can't we just get AI to detect these gestures? We know what they look like. Can't we just teach an AI to detect them the way we detect them, and then have the AI do the hard work so that we can do the analysis part? We wanted to do the part that humans do best by letting the AI do what it does best, which is pattern recognition. And so that's what we tried to do. We knew that there were 5 main modes of interaction that these kids were having between themselves, the computer, each other, their gestures, and the robot, right? And so we isolated a 5-minute segment. We extracted 1 frame, 27 frames per second over 1,000 images. We grabbed 25 per interaction that we wanted the AI to detect. So 125 total because there were 5 modes of interaction. And then we just wanted to see if it worked. So we ended this whole process by doing human validation of that analysis. So anybody who's done AI world, you have to have an image of your AI. Ours was very simple. We did not have a lot of folds. We did not do a lot of some of the typical things that you would do to validate your algorithm, because we were going to validate it personally. We really wanted to think of the AI like a member of a qualitative analysis team. And we want to say, you do your job, and then we're going to member check. We're going to see if you did your job really well. And so you can see on the bottom, there were 5 modes of interaction. There was looking at the computer, which meant looking off screen. There were numerical representations. There was imitating the robot with their hands like this, because the wheels were their hands. They would look down at their workbook, and they would interact with the robot. Sometimes the AI did a good job. So you can see on the left-hand side here, the AI will spit out each of those images and code it. It will show you the code that it found. So on the left-hand side, the A part of this figure, you can see that it detected computer, meaning she was looking at the computer, and imitating the robot. That didn't quite look like a numerical representation, but it did a good job detecting a gesture and looking off screen. And the other one I wanted to show is that sometimes it got it wrong. Yes, it detected a numerical representation with the hand. It kind of looks like a numerical representation. It couldn't tell whether the boy was looking off screen at the computer or down at the workbook, so it labeled it with both. So then we went and validated. We grabbed 300 of the 1,200 images, about 25% of them. And we went through and we checked. We looked at when the AI predicted something, but we didn't see it. We looked at when we predicted something, but the AI didn't detect it. And we checked to see whether we agreed with the AI. So whenever we agreed with the AI, that was considered a true positive. The AI detected what we detected. Great. False positive. The AI said something was there that wasn't really there. That's not so good. And then sometimes it would miss something that we saw in a frame. The reason why you frame this as true positive, false negative is because you can then calculate statistics that tell you something about your AI and how it's performing. One is when it detects, is it detecting correctly? That's good, but AI has to do something besides detect correctly. It also has to distinguish instances from non-instances, and that's what the other things are for. What's the quality of that detection when it is detecting, and how well does it distinguish an instance from a non-instance? All of those together are really important for understanding how an AI performs. And so you can see on these tables, if you just looked at, is it detecting correctly, the accuracy part of it, it did a really great job, right? Whenever there was a robot present, it detected it. Whenever someone imitated the robot, it detected it. But if you go and look at the other ones, precision and recall, which has to do with detecting instances from non-instances and that sort of thing, it starts to fall apart. It could not detect a robot from a non-robot. It just couldn't do it. When it was there, great, but it was like it was guessing. And so that F1 value combines those other metrics to give you an idea of when it's detecting, is it detecting instances from non-instances, and is it good quality? And so we were actually kind of pleased with this. We found that it could detect instances of looking at the computer really well, numerical representations really well, and the workbook pretty well, 73%. The other ones, not so good. But I'm a mathematician, and I like when we detect numerical representations. That means something really important to me. And so what we were trying to show people was once you know that there were 50 numerical representations, you, the researcher, can then go spend your time not combing through 1,000 images to find them, but to look at the output, find where number pops up, and then go and create a multimodal example of what was happening in that moment. And so you can see how the article I had you read can become the thing you do after the AI can detect where are those numerical representations happening. And so you can extract images. You can see here that they were talking about a speed of 4. There was a 90-degree turn. There was a lot of mathematics going on in this one moment with our AI. And if that doesn't give you an idea of why this is important for our field, there's even more. The idea that cognition is an ongoing loop between perceiving something as being possible, anticipating the results, and then trying it is really at the heart of educational robotics. So we took that Barcelou cycle of situated activity, and we looked at the way those kids actually, how their problem-solving process unfolded over time, looking for those loops of trying an idea, coming up with an idea, picking one path, and then doing it, and looking at how that played out over time. And it was pretty fascinating. Things that they did in little ways early became things they did in integral ways later. We used embodiment to design this whole thing. Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah, we have a question from Dr. Kimmons in the chat if you want to read that.
Oh, so, okay, I'm not an AI person. So my understanding of the F1 value is that it looks at both of those things together. It kind of combines them to give you an overall sense of how the AI was doing outside of when there was an instance of something. It's when there wasn't an instance or that kind of thing. But again, I'm no AI person. But if you look at the precision and recall, you can see, let me see here. Can I go backwards? Yes, I can. You can see how it's kind of reflected like with interacting with the robot, right? It did really high quality whenever the robot was present in something. It just couldn't detect the robot from instances of non-robot. And so if you look at the way F1, oh, I didn't have F1 value, but the way F1 value is, it's based on both of those statistics. I don't remember if it's equal though, you might be right. All I know is that in general, it really didn't do a good job detecting those, right? But you can see like with numerical representation, both the precision and the recall were fairly high. And then when those two get blended together, the overall performance was, I mean, we were looking at 80% as being satisfactory.
That's fine. I only ask because I think F1, the one sensor, it's a one-to-one relationship between precision and recall. And so some studies, they do like a 2-to-1 if like precision is more important to them than recall, and that allows your F value to be higher. Because not all studies require you want those to be equally weighted. In that case, like it allows you to get a higher F value so you can trust your machine more. But yeah.
I mean, I can address this later. Our bigger issue is that our validation was not loved by a lot of computer scientists who reviewed our paper, because there's a very distinct way of validating an AI that they know and accept in their field. And it wasn't what we were trying to do in our paper. We had an educational research goal, and they had a build the best AI goal, and that wasn't our goal. We didn't need the best AI. We needed a functional AI who could serve as a member of a qualitative research team analyzing data. Okay, so why is this important in our field? One, young kids don't do proof like adults do proof. You probably didn't start doing formal proof till 8th grade or even 10th grade, depending upon where you went to school. The problem with that is that sometimes it's the first time kids are actually doing proof, period, even though they're capable of doing proof at a younger age, because kids are smart and they can reason mathematically and geometrically. And so gestures have been linked, and it's been argued that there's this thing called invisible proof, that when you make a gesture, it contains a ton of mathematical ideas that you don't have to articulate formally, so that you can get to the good parts of the inferential thinking and the deductive thinking that goes with doing mathematical proof. So I'm going to hold up a cup here. We were doing rotational symmetry, which has an axis of symmetry. And when you rotate something around that axis, it has to look the same as you rotate it, right? Our kids were making that gesture, and there's a lot going on in there. For one thing, that axis of symmetry is generally perpendicular to the things that it intersects with. They didn't have to know perpendicularity, though. They didn't have to articulate it. They just showed the axis of symmetry. They knew that it had to bisect things. It would be like, it has to be in the middle of the edge. It has to be in the middle of the face. Yes, that's right. And when you put it in the middle of the top edge, in the middle of the bottom face, you get perpendicularity when you have rotational symmetry, right? So there's a lot of invisible proof going on that can be a launch pad for formal proof if we let kids engage in this. If we looked at what they were doing with their hands and how their hands were representing the abstract things that they were thinking about mathematically. That is exciting to me, but maybe not the group. I acknowledge that. But VR is incredibly embodied, right? When you're in a VR environment, your bodily actions affect that environment potentially, if it's a well-designed VR. Some things aren't quite that good, but you get my point. We are now at a point in our field where the technologies that we have, AI, VR, AR, XR, whatever, the relationship between that technology and our bodies is becoming more and more intimate. AI can scan what we do online, it can scan us, and it can react to us, and then we can react to it. Same thing with VR. Yes, Royce, you're not wrong. I have more to say about that. I've been thinking about it while I'm talking here. But my point is that our field is now rich with technology that looks like this. And our field does not have a cognitive perspective that explains how we learn. We're still looking at the brain like a filing cabinet, encoding, storing, and retrieving amodal stuff, when the things that we're moving towards with our technology are all modal. So I hope that gives you something to think about. Like I said, I hope it at least piques your interest and gives you an idea of what embodied cognition is. It's brain, body, and environment. Perception and action are directly linked from this perspective. And most importantly, the things we do are simulations based on bodily states, the modes of interaction that we encountered it with, and the situation, the situatedness of that action. And we do this so that we can perceive what's possible and take action in the world. And this is the part where I wish I was there, but I'm going to send this to Heather so she can hand them out. I had a bag full of cinnamon candies for each of you, because I don't want you to forget that embodied cognition is about modality. It's about senses. It's about the way the body and the environment come together. And if you're going to think about doing design around embodied cognition, that's what you want to think about. So I was going to give each of you a cinnamon to enjoy at the end of my presentation here, so that the next time you have cinnamon, not only will you think about snickerdoodles and pie and cider, but maybe, just maybe, you'll think about what we talked about here today, and how there's a different way of thinking about cognition and the brain, and our relationship between the body and the brain and the environment that our field doesn't typically talk about. And if that happens, I want you to email me and say, Dr. Kopcha, you were right. So that I can write back and say, I know. All right, that's my talk. I'm at UGA. I appreciate everybody being here. Sorry if I lost the thread of the chat, but I'm happy to answer questions, take questions now. Going back to Royce's, which is, you're not wrong, Royce, but we treated them equally in our case, primarily because that's what one of the computer science reviewers was looking for. And sometimes you just do what the reviewer wants. And we didn't want to fight it because we were fighting other things. Does that make sense? Plus, our AI didn't really do that good with detecting the robot and even imitating the robot. It detected imitating the robot more often as a numerical representation. And had I to do it over again, I would just put him in a category of gesture, instead of trying to differentiate between the type of gesture, because we didn't have enough data to create that sophisticated of a detection. But it was what it was. We flew too close to the sun. And I think those F values reflect that. And I was happy to present them that way, because that's what the reviewer was saying, like, it didn't work in those categories. So don't say that it worked. We're like, okay, it didn't work. Thank you.
Okay, well, we are out of time for the presentation, so let's thank Dr. Kopcha again for his insights and sharing his ideas with us. Wonderful thoughts and some really important things, I think, for our field. If you do have other questions or would like to continue conversation, yeah, please take him up on his offer to chat about it and get a hold of him. Isaac and Ashley, it's your turn this week to think of some questions that can go into Canvas for our ongoing discussion. We thank you all again for your attendance. Wish you the best, Dr. Kopcha, in your recovery.
Thank
you all. We'll see you back in seminar again next Wednesday afternoon. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.